Hi guys, Justin here, and I've made the switch. I've gone from sleeping bags to quilts, and I'm loving it. I have here the Thermarest Vesper quilt. This is the -6 version, and today we're going to go over all the features, specs of this quilt, what I love about it, what I don't like so much about it, and overall why I think quilts are the way to go for most people when they're backpacking. Welcome back. So quilts are used by most of the backpacking community, especially those who have gone ultralight, and for good reason. There's a number of reasons I haven't made the switch yet. Number one being the availability in Canada. With import duties and the exchange rate, it costs a lot to import quilts from the cottage manufacturers in the States, and quilts haven't really been widely available from the major manufacturers and carried by the big box stores like Mountain Equipment Co-op in Canada. This year there's been a few more that have come out, and the big entry into the market has been the Thermarest Vesper quilt. With the introduction of this quilt, I went and picked it up because I really wanted to see what the hype was all about. I've been using a sleeping bag for my entire life, and they're okay, but I'm a very active sleeper and I'm a side sleeper, and I get tangled up in my sleeping bag all the time, even if I have a size wide sleeping bag. So I really want to see how a quilt would do with my sleeping style. So the big difference between a quilt and a sleeping bag is while the sleeping bag encompasses you all the way around and has a zipper to kind of enclose the entire bag, a quilt doesn't have a bottom to it. So it's basically just like a blanket. So you might be thinking, well, if you don't have anything underneath your back, then aren't you going to get cold? And that's kind of a fallacy with quilts versus sleeping bags. It's really the sleeping pad that protects you from the coldness of the ground. The sleeping pad will keep you warm enough. With down and even synthetic, when you're laying on the sleeping bag, you're compressing a lot of that insulation anyways, and it's losing a lot of its insulative properties. So you don't really lose that much insulation with the quilt. You may have also heard that it's uncomfortable relative to a sleeping bag, and I'm going to get into the comfort of a quilt, but I would also just say, spoiler alert, the quilt is really comfortable. Cost-wise, quilts should be a little bit cheaper, but because of their lack of availability and broad manufacturing, they do end up being about the same price as a sleeping bag, especially in Canada. So this quilt just came out by Thermarest this year and is available for $370 US and can be picked up at most major outdoor stores. So let's go over some of the specs and features of this quilt. First up, the weight. It weighs 540 grams for the regular sized -6 degree quilt, which is really good. The way it achieves that weight savings is the Denier nylon fabric that is used on the inside and outside, as well as a 900 power fill down, which is a really high power for down. This is the size regular, which Thermarest advertises is good for up to 6 feet. There's also a long version, which is good for up to 6'6". And I used both, and I found that for myself, I'm 5'10", the regular size was fine. With the size large, I was able to pull it up over my head, but it was really not needed. And what I actually found was the extra fabric and room in the quilt led to some drafting spots and kind of just not as snug of a fit and wasn't quite as warm. I have a size large sleeping pad here, the Etherlite XT men's size large, and it's 25 inches wide, and the size regular quilt works fine with it. I was a little bit worried that the quilt wouldn't be quite wide enough and I'd be getting some drafts through the sides, but I was out the other weekend and it was pretty windy and there's some wind coming underneath my tent fly, and I wasn't getting any drafts with this quilt, and it was quite cold out. So in addition to that 900 power fill down, this quilt uses a box baffle construction. So instead of all these seams being sewn right through the quilt to the other side, there's vertical walls at those seams, and those are to have baffling, and that allows the down to loft higher and create a bit more warmth. And you're not going to get cold spots at the seams like you would with a sewn through system. There's also the foot box on the end here. So you can see it's wide open on this side of the quilt. The foot box is enclosed. There's no zipper or cinches in order to open the foot box up. There's 2 points where you can add a strap for your sleeping pad in order to keep the quilt in place. There's a point here and then another point here. So there's little loops at either of these spots, and then you can attach a strap, like right here, underneath the sleeping pad to keep the quilt in place. And I really like having that strap underneath the sleeping pad because when I'm moving around a lot, it keeps the quilt in place and I don't end up with the quilt coming off of me and leaving me with cold spots. It also, I find, helps a little bit keep the drafts out. One of the things that Thermarest didn't do was include 2 straps for each of those strap locations, but I did send them an email and they said that they'd send me another one, which is really nice of them, and it's great to see them looking out for their customers. So I did get the -6 version of this quilt because where I am in the Rockies of Canada, it does get quite cold. It's usually less than 10 degrees Celsius, even in the summertime at night, and this quilt will help me out in those conditions. I have used it in -3 degrees Celsius, freezing 0 degrees Celsius, and +3 degrees Celsius. And the -6 rating is definitely a lower limit for this quilt. It's rated at 0 for comfort, and I would say that's an accurate rating. At -3, I had to put on my down puffy jacket in order to stay warm. At 0, I was perfectly comfortable in base layers and a toque. And then at +3 degrees, I didn't even worry about the quilt being on me that much, and I was completely warm. When it was 0 and -3, I had to use one of the features at the head here. So there's baffling around the neck, which is really nice, as well as this snap enclosure, which you snap and then stick your head through this hole here, and then it keeps everything kind of in place and around you and really warm and no drafts at all. And if you need to tighten up, there's a cinch right here just to enclose that neck area, just to add quite a bit more warmth. And I'd say that's really necessary if you're sleeping in around freezing degree weather. I sleep a bit warm, so if you do sleep colder, maybe add a couple degrees to those comfort limits. So the last thing I want to talk about with this quilt is comfort. I don't think people talk about how much more comfortable quilts are compared to sleeping bags. I've been using sleeping bags my whole life and I didn't know what I was missing with a quilt. I'm a really active sleeper and I'm a side sleeper. I bounce around from side to side and then also onto my stomach and back throughout the night. And a quilt, especially with the sides, with the understrap, really allows me to do that without getting anything tangled up and staying warm all night. With the sleeping bag, I'd often wake up with the hood all over my face or just all tangled up, and it just was never that comfortable. With the quilt, I was able to move around even with the neck baffling done up and didn't have any problems with the quilt falling off of me or getting cold at night, and it never got tangled up. So big shout out to quilts for their overall comfort. So I'd definitely say the hype around quilts is legit. You get huge weight savings with them. They compress to much smaller dimensions than a sleeping bag, and they don't cost any more than a sleeping bag. I think Thermarest did a really good job with their entry here into the ultralight down quilt market. This thing seems really well constructed. The 10 Denier nylon seems really durable. All of the stitching seems really nice, and it's nice to see that at least the quilt is true to the comfort rating that they advertise it at. Even all the little details with this quilt seem to have been done well, from the width of the foot box, which is wide enough that I never felt like my feet were constricted, to the little loops always kind of holding onto that pad strap, to the neck baffle here, and the clip, as well as the side baffling being wide enough and thick enough to keep any drafts out. As I've used this quilt, I haven't really noticed any crazy migration of down within the bag. You do have horizontal baffles throughout the entire way, with baffling right down each side right here to keep the down from migrating to the sides too much. So I'm glad I tried out quilts. I'm glad I've made the plunge and converted over. If you guys have any questions about quilts or this quilt in particular, then leave a comment below. And like the video if you enjoyed it. This wraps up my sleep system change up. I've gotten a new sleeping pad, new quilt, new pillow. I'm all set for my sleep system for this year. No more changes. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I think I'm gonna be sleeping really well on the trail all summer long. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you later.